Sheena Goss is an interaction designer and user experience analyst at Wells Fargo. She researches web users and applies findings to simplify processes and solve business problems. Formerly trained in graphic design, Sheena combines her knowledge of layout and typography principles to design and evaluate internal websites and applications. Her recent accomplishments include developing a content strategy for the Wells Fargo Law Department, redesigning the online experience for requesting and tracking work orders inside the Corporate Properties Division, and conducting her department's first remote usability test to compare products for a multi-million-dollar identity and access management project. Sheena earned her MLIS in 2012 from San Jose State's School of Library and Information Science, where she concentrated on research methodologies, online information seeking behavior, and web usability. Sheena Goss, thank you so much for coming to speak to our Library 251 course here, and go ahead and take it away.
Hi everybody, I'm really excited to be here and speak to you tonight and to share my experience as a user experience and interaction designer, and also talk a little bit about how some of the coursework that you're learning in this class and the program can help you explore other careers in the library and information science field. So Caroline and Eric, feel free to ask questions along the way. If I miss something in the chat window, just let me know, but I'm really open to questions as we go through this presentation if you have anything that you want further explanation on or need a little bit more information. So I'm going to start out by telling you a little bit about my background, and I'll explain the user experience design process in the department where I currently work, and then I'll show you some examples of sketching and usability testing that I've employed at some of the projects that I work on. So as Jeremy mentioned, I am a graduate from the MLIS program at San Jose State University. I graduated in May, and I've been working as an interaction designer since about October of 2011. I have a background in professional communications and mostly graphic design, and how I got to my current place of employment right now is largely in part due to a lot of the skills that I learned in this program and in this class specifically. My current career as an interaction designer, I found this opportunity after completing an internship with the San Mateo County Library looking at redesigning their intranet, and I'll show you some examples of what I did in that project later on. While I was completing my internship and finishing my coursework in the program, I was employed as a communications consultant with my current company, Wells Fargo. And as I was working through the program, I started to explore alternate career paths that had to do with the library and information science field, and it really drew me into interaction design and usability testing. So a lot of what I learned in this course really helped prepare me for my current career. A little bit more about how I gained my experience. A lot of the heuristic review skills, the sketching and the usability testing assignments that I completed in Library 251 really helped prepare me for my internship at the San Mateo County Library System. I applied to work on general projects with the library, and because of my background and my involvement with intranets, when the library was redesigning theirs, they placed me and my internship project on helping the library system redesign and evaluate their intranet. And that project largely involved understanding the current state of the intranet and helping them understand what might be working well and might not be working well, using the vocabulary and the skills that come from interaction design and usability testing. And then a lot of the project work that I completed in my internship really helped me when I was applying for the interaction designer position at Wells Fargo, because I was able to talk about things like heuristic reviews, usability testing, sketching, and designing. And so it put me on a good path to be able to explore careers in user experience and interaction design. So here's an example of one of my projects from this course. This is a sketch of the San Francisco Public Library's e-library site, And I chose to look at this site and evaluate it for my project that involved sketching and user testing and heuristic reviews. And what I thought was so great about this project and what really helped me in the internship and in my career is it gives you a wide variety of applications for sketching. And this particular one that I've got up on the screen was completed using Adobe Illustrator. And it's a little bit more polished than most of the sketches I initially start with. What I think is so great about sketching when you're working as a designer is it gives you a lot of good ways to get ideas down on paper, and it lets you approach design from an iterative methodology where you're constantly looking at ways to refine and update and adapt your design based on the feedback that you're getting from your users and from things like usability testing. Here's an example of a report that I completed for my internship as one of the first projects that I started on. The San Mateo County Library System calls their intranet FIDO, which is an acronym for Finding Information Digitally Online. And when I was getting started in the internship, the librarians were really looking for a way to talk about what wasn't working well with the current state. They knew that people were having problems with it, but without something like a heuristic review, it was more difficult to articulate what exactly wasn't working with the design and with the interaction. So by being able to do something like a heuristic evaluation, you can give a project team or an organization the vocabulary and the language to talk about what they can adapt in their current system to create a stronger user experience. Some of the other deliverables that came out of my internship that really helped me when I was interviewing for my current position were doing things like creating a sitemap, because it shows that you can visually think about how to organize information for something like a website or an online information system. I talked a little bit about the heuristic review. I do many heuristic reviews now in my current position. They generally aren't written up as formally as this particular report or as formally as they were in some of my assignments that I completed for this course. Oftentimes I don't share the full research with my clients because really what they're looking for is just a way to understand what's not working well and how we can move forward from that point going forward. But for me as a designer, heuristic reviews give me a really good way to level set on what's happening in the online environment and what I wanted to do to adapt the interface and make it more usable. I also completed some user personas in my internship, and that's a user-centered design tool that is extremely helpful not only in website design but also in marketing, in a lot of the information that you do to understand a user group or any kind of set of people that might be coming to you and looking for services. And so before we get into more examples of some of the work that I've been completing, I just wanted to talk to you really briefly about career opportunities in user experience. And obviously, if you're taking this course, you've got a bit of an interest in this area. Library and information science students are really well qualified for a lot of positions because of the skills that you're learning in this program. Many of them are transferable. Many of them are directly applicable, like this usability testing course. But just some of the areas where LIS students can look for areas of employment are in positions like content strategists, and those are designers that are working on projects to help understand what information needs to be placed on a website to help users complete their goals. So it's things like the text that makes up the information on a web page, the documents that are included in a website, the naming conventions for URLs and subject headings and any of the other headers within a web page. Information architecture is also another area where library and information science students are really well qualified because you have the skills for taking large sets of information and finding logical ways to group it based on the needs of your users. Some other career titles that you may hear in some fancy job description names are things like user researchers, where you are employing different methodologies to learn about the users who come to a website how they digest and consume information, and their mental models for when they go to websites and applications and how they look for information. Of course, you're familiar with usability testing and usability analysts now. Those are emerging roles where your skills are definitely applicable. And then interaction design is it's like website design, but it's the actual discipline of figuring out how users move through a website or a web application and interact with it when they're trying to perform very specific tasks. And again, LIS students are really well qualified for those positions. A lot of the skills that are employed in this career field are things like audience assessment, information organization, program evaluations, and research. And these are all things that you're learning in this program that position you to do well in these kinds of careers. So let me tell you a little bit about the user experience process at my group. I work in a department of Wells Fargo that specializes in technology and operations. So it's all of the data and the systems that helps the bank function. And our particular group is a practitioner of something we call Lean UX. It's a website discipline that really focuses on iterative design and constantly updating websites and designs based on user feedback. We operate almost like an in-house consulting group, and so different areas of the company will come to us with either a website or a web-based application or an online workflow that either they're looking to design from scratch or they have something in place already that maybe isn't operating as optimally as they would like, and they want our help evaluating it and figuring out ways that we can update it. So generally what starts our process out is we sit with the client and we get to know the particular issue that they're trying to resolve. We write out a working agreement so they have a clear expectation of the kind of work that they can expect from us and the things that we'll be able to do to help address their problems. And then we spend a lot of time understanding their business needs, and this is a really fundamental process in web design because one of the key points of having a website is understanding what your users are going to come to the site to do. And task-based website design, where you're really figuring out the kinds of things people need to do on a website, really helps to build more successful sites down the road. So we spend a lot of time at the beginning helping businesses understand and articulate what they're trying to accomplish. And then we also set up timelines and just get a general understanding of what they can expect from us and what we should expect from them in terms of if they have a particular time frame in which they need to get something developed and deployed. After we've got that information settled, we kick off our user research. This involves doing things like interviewing users of a website or an application to figure out maybe what's working well right now or what isn't working well, and we employ a lot of user-centered design techniques at this stage where we do things like I've gone to people's offices and watched them work throughout the day so that I can observe habits of things like if they print out lots of documents and tape them up around their office, that tells me that they're having a hard time finding the information that they need in an online environment. So we look for little ways that we could help figure out what users are trying to accomplish and how to include that in our designs and our deliverables. We also do a lot of scenario and task modeling, where again we take those business needs and the goals of the website and figure out what steps need to be taken in an online environment to accomplish that goal. At this point in time, when we're getting a baseline understanding of who the users are and what kind of information they're looking for, we might develop high-level sitemaps. We generally don't go much further than the first or second level of a site at this point, because this is where our concept of Lean UX comes into play. What we do is we start with a general idea of what we're building. And then because we want to involve users and constantly test and incorporate their feedback, we don't develop the entire sitemap at the beginning. We wait and build out portions of the site so that we can design a little bit, get a prototype built, and then put it in front of a user and watch them try to use it and make sure that it's meeting their needs and that they are able to move through the environment in the way that we expect them to. And then it's a constant process of iterating based on that feedback. If we observe them doing something with the website that maybe takes them down a path they weren't necessarily anticipating, or we observe that they're having some trouble using the application, we figure out where they're getting hung up and then iterate our designs to address those issues. And then it's a constant process until we get to a point where we feel like the user is successful in accomplishing their goals and they're able to carry out those tasks that they want to accomplish when they come to the site. So let me show you some examples of how things like sketching and usability testing can be applied in work environments and some project settings. Again, the way that my team works is very heavily project-based. So we'll get an assignment from a client and then work in teams where we may have an interaction designer and an engagement manager who's focused on building the relationship with the client, and a web developer who is responsible for creating the code of the product. And so in my role as an interaction designer, I'm generally involved at the beginning stages of a project to understand the business problems, conduct the user research, and then start to sketch and design possible solutions, and evaluating those sketches with website users and making sure that they are functioning properly before we invest a lot of time and resources in things like development and actually coding the final product. So a little bit of information about sketching and how we use it in my department. I think sketching is one of the best things that you can do at the onset of a project, even just to document ideas or things that you hear from users or ways that you could incorporate a design pattern into some kind of solution. Some of the things that I've sketched and I've got tacked up around my workspace are things like task flows for a project that I'm working on at a given point in time. I'll always sketch out a website wireframe before I move to an application to draw it out, and I'll show you some examples of what that looks like in the next slide. I've also sketched out page layouts, navigation elements, and my preference is to always start with pencil and paper. I feel like it's a lot less intimidating and a lot less finalized if I can just get my ideas down on paper first. And often if I put something down on paper, when I move it into an application, that'll start my first round of iteration because I'll think about new ideas or new ways of presenting information based on what I've heard from users that I may not have necessarily known when I started my initial sketch. There's a few different ways that you can sketch. They're really classified as low fidelity prototypes and high fidelity prototypes, and the difference is a low fidelity prototype is just a sketch with no logic behind it. A high fidelity prototype could be something that is electronically based that a user could sit down in front of and actually interact with like they would a functioning website. So low fidelity prototypes, generally pencil drawings on paper, but they could also be wireframe sketches using a wireframing application or a drawing application. The difference is that high fidelity prototypes have that logic implemented in them so that users can actually function with the document, whereas with low fidelity prototypes, if you want the user to interact with it, it's generally through means like touching it with their fingers or pointing somewhere with a pencil. Jeremy referenced that my team does remote usability testing, and because I'm in one geographic location and my clients are in another one, the way that we handle low fidelity prototype testing is I'll put up a screen image of something that I've done in Photoshop or another wireframing application, and I'll ask the tester to move their mouse and show me where they would click if it was an actual functioning website. So here's a comparison of a low fidelity and high fidelity prototype for a project that I'm currently working on. This is for a department within Wells Fargo that's got an internal website and intranet. They've actually got 5 or 6 of them. They're trying to bring them under one cohesive URL that better organizes their information and better markets their services and explains who they are to the entire company. And so when I started out with the project, the picture that you see in the back left is a picture of an index card that I'm using to sketch out wireframes of websites. This particular one is an idea for the home page of the new intranet. And you can see it is pretty unsophisticated. It's very quickly done. It's just a way for me to get an idea of things like how I want the global navigation to appear. Some of the tools that I've heard from some of the users and the department representatives that I've talked to have mentioned things like, we have such a hard time figuring out who we're supposed to call in certain situations, so I made sure to carve out a space to put in a search function for people to find subject matter experts. So the goal at this point with a low fidelity prototype was just to be able to document what I was hearing from the users about what they were trying to accomplish and make sure that I had a point of reference to go back to with my sketch. This one I actually didn't do any usability testing with it yet. What you see on the upper right-hand corner is a high fidelity version of this sketch. This is drawn in an application my group uses that's called iRise. And this is an application that lets us create clickable prototypes and wireframes where we can actually include our business requirements in with the sketch. So if there's annotations that our developers need to be aware of, we can bundle those in with our sketches in one program. And with this version, this is what I'll actually use to conduct some usability tests with users later on in the project. And I see Jeremy's got a question. I'm going to turn this off for one moment and hand it over to him.
I was wondering if you had had a chance to look at Balsamiq from Google, and if this is a similar kind of an application.
Yes, this is a similar application. I've not used Balsamiq, but I've met a number of designers who use it. And I believe there's another one called Azure that's similar. They're all kind of in the same vein and just produced by different companies, but it is exactly the same concept as that. And Eric, it looks like you've got a question.
Well, Professor, did you have another one, or was I able to ask one?
Oh, go right ahead.
Okay, Sheena, I was wondering the second diagram, the one that looks more refined, I was unclear. Is that actually a website, or was that another sketch that you drew with that program you were talking about? I missed that part.
The second, more refined image is not yet a website. It's a high-fidelity prototype that was created with that application that's called iRise. So there's no HTML coding in this. There's no style sheets in the sense of how a website is created. There's no scripting or programming. It's a lot like if you've used an application like Photoshop or Illustrator, any kind of graphic layout application that lets you put images or shapes onto a document. That same kind of concept. I haven't employed any kind of logic or interaction to this prototype yet. I might a little bit later on in the process so that when I have someone test it, they can see what it's actually like to try and search for somebody's name and see a results window that pops up. But right now this is just strictly sketching with text tools and layout tools.
Well, I think that's brilliant because, you're starting off with that basic one and then you go to this other one, and to me, this is just a personal observation, that would make it easier then to use the coding and then say, well, we could make a table in the middle or 3 rows or whatever. So I like that iRise program. I'm going to investigate that. Thanks for letting us know.
Absolutely, and a lot of those kinds of applications will let you download free trials. So I'm not certain if iRise has one, but if you go to the website that Jeremy's provided, it'll give you more information about the product and show you some demos. And if you see those ones or things like Balsamiq, and they do have those trials, I would encourage you to, if you're interested, download them and play around with them a little bit and see what kinds of things you can create using those applications. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our process for usability testing. I think you're either approaching an assignment where you're going to experience usability testing, or you may have already completed some. But I think usability testing is an essential part of being a designer and creating websites and online applications. It's really hard as a designer to sometimes separate yourself from the process and make sure that you're keeping your users top of mind and design things in a way that not only seems right to you, but also makes sense to the user. And so usability testing gives you an opportunity to kind of step out of your role as a designer and watch someone interact with the solution that you've created and determine how easy it is for them to navigate through a website or an application. So some of the things that we've expressed to our clients when we tell them that we want to include usability testing in a project or an engagement, we tell them it's a process for them to get an opportunity to observe users actually interacting with the website that we've created. There's a number of reasons why usability testing is incredibly important to businesses and companies. And if you go to usability.gov, I believe I've got some resources at the end of this presentation. They'll tell you all kinds of reasons why businesses and organizations should invest the time in usability testing to save later on down the road when they've actually deployed the application. It includes things like cost saves and better customer experience, better reputation management. So there really is a strong business case for including this in any kind of web design process. One of the most important parts about usability testing, and something that we remind our clients of when they do participate in observing usability tests, is that this is a time to watch the tester navigate through the website and listen to their reaction. It's not like many of our clients come from a computer software background where they do things like user acceptance testing, and they try to follow functional scripts to make sure that an application that they can complete the instructions that they've been given. And usability testing is almost the opposite of that, where you just want to set people loose and have them explore the interface as they would on their own if they were interacting with it in their normal environment. So as a usability tester, one of the most valuable things that you can do is to guide your user in giving them tasks to complete, but then step back and just observe and watch what happens. If you notice that somebody is struggling with something, or if they comment on something, often it's an opportunity for you to ask probing questions and figure out what's happening and really get into the user's state of mind so that you can be able to articulate later on why something may or may not have worked well in a particular design. So my team's process for usability testing follows a pretty similar path to what we do with our design projects. It's really when we start a process, we define the study with our clients and our project partners to help us understand the goals that they have for conducting a usability test. In the project that Jeremy referenced in my introduction, we were working with a client that was comparing two different applications, and before they made the investment in either application, they wanted to understand what team members would feel like when they use these systems. And instead of investing the money in purchasing both of them, they wanted to create a proof of concept environment where people were given the opportunity to actually try and conduct their day-to-day work using these applications. And we helped them understand what had the best user experience out of the two. So I'll show you some examples of that project in the following slides. But it's really essential in the first stage of your usability test to define your study in terms of what you're testing, who's going to be your test participants, how you're going to conduct the test, whether it's going to be in person or using remote tools, which we'll talk about. Then you want to design your test, and that includes a lot of the exercises that you go through in this course where you develop a testing script and you come up with a template for taking notes. You figure out the kinds of activities that you are going to test, you're going to have the user test, and that you're going to observe. Then, of course, you conduct the test, and there's all kinds of information available about how you can facilitate usability tests in unbiased ways and make sure that the information that you're collecting really does represent the user's behavior. And then finally, you, of course, always want to analyze and share your results so you can help people understand what you learned by conducting these tests. And I'll show you some examples of our remote usability tests and how we packaged the information for our client to be able to make a decision about which application would work best for them. So here's an example of when we were defining this usability test about how we approached figuring out what people were going to, essentially what they were going to test in the usability scenarios. We always start with audience assessment, user interviews, developing profiles, and then defining tasks that users conduct in those scenarios. So in this example, you'll see a big table of 5 unique user groups that we identified and the kinds of activities that they would conduct in relation to this application. And the reason why it was so critical to have this defined with our partners in this study was because they had a general sense of associated activities that were going to take place with this application, but they didn't really have it documented anywhere. And because the process was so different across the company, one representative may have done things a certain way, while another one in a different department may have a completely unique approach for accomplishing these kinds of things. So when we worked with the client to define the kinds of tasks that we were going to test, it made sure that both the usability test facilitator and the clients had a shared understanding about what we were trying to observe and what was important to have us ask the usability testers to try and do during their test. So here's an example of the usability test script that we used for this project. It was developed using the resources on usability.gov and using a lot of their templates and suggestions for how to lead a usability test. But you can see a few distinct components of this test script. And this is the first page from the documentation that we used in the test. I read a lot of this word for word when I was working with the testers. And what I wanted to do was set their expectations for what was going to happen over the next hour during our usability test. I wanted to explain my role to them, that I was here to evaluate and record their reactions. But then I also wanted to make sure that they were completely aware that we were testing the application and it was not a test of their performance or any kind of judgment on them about how they use the application. Sometimes people go into a usability test, and if they're not familiar with the process, they may think that they're being tested or evaluated in some way, or they may not be using the application correctly. And in fact, it's exactly the opposite. We want to watch real users conduct it in the way that they naturally would, so that we can make sure that the application is designed in a way that facilitates their normal behavior. So we also made sure that the participants knew some things about the test, like it was not a test of them, there weren't right or wrong answers. We were recording the audio from the test and also capturing the screen images of the test since we were working remotely. And anytime you do that, it's always important to make sure that people know that you're recording and using the information. And depending on, if you work for a contracting company or any kind of corporation, they may have additional requirements about gaining people's approval or consensus before recording their voice or using their name in these kinds of studies. So it's always important to check that out before you conduct a usability test. And then finally, I made sure that I had prompts for myself throughout the script to remind me for when I needed to do certain things to make sure that the equipment was recording the test appropriately. So you'll see some bold text and italics at the bottom. And throughout the script, those were my reminders to make sure that I did things like start the recording application and start the recording of the conference call. And like I mentioned, our usability test was set up remotely. So that meant that me, the test facilitator, and my test participants were not in the same room at the time of the test. The way that we set it up in our department was we have an application that we use that lets us view another person's computer screen. It's called Live Meeting, and it's a Microsoft product, but it's very similar to something like GoToMeeting or WebEx, if you're familiar with those. And what it does is let me view another person's computer screen on my own computer, so I can watch as they do things like use a website or try and use an application to conduct a certain activity. And then finally, since we did not have audio bundled in with our screen sharing application, I had a separate conference call set up so that myself and the usability test participant and the clients could call in and listen to the tester as they were going through the test and giving us feedback. So here's an example of the note-taker guide that was used for this particular study. There's another designer on my team who is based in Minneapolis, and she played the role of the note-taker during this usability test so that I could focus on asking questions to the participant and observing what was happening when they were trying to complete tasks. And so I created a template for her to record information about the test and make sure that some of the metrics that we wanted to evaluate at the end of the test to qualify and quantify the results were captured somewhere. So we wanted to know things like the length of time it took them to complete a task. We wanted to know whether or not the participant was successful in completing certain tasks. And then I had some follow-up questions that I asked at the end of any scenario that we gave. And I gave a place for the note-taker to be able to record the test participants' responses to that. So the way that we set up this test is there were, I believe, 7 or 8 scenarios that I issued to each test participant. And you can see an example at the top of the screen here where I read out a scenario and then set the tester loose on the application to try and figure out how to complete it. And so this is the guide that the note-taker was using as we moved through those scenarios to make sure that important information was captured so that when we were analyzing the results, we had this kind of guide that we could work off of. And then, of course, the final step in conducting a usability test is finding a way to share your results. And there's a lot of different ways that you can summarize a result. A lot of the decision just depends on what makes sense for you and your client and how much time and investment you can make in summarizing and capturing the results. I've seen usability tests where consultants put together these really impressive presentations with video clips and sound bites and recordings, and those are definitely helpful in recreating specific issues that took place in the usability test and helping clients understand where users may have struggled during a test, but those do take a lot of time. And if you don't have that kind of time, there are other ways that you can still summarize your results and help people understand what happened in a usability test without spending as much time on creating a report like that. Some of the things that you can do is put together a spreadsheet of quantitative results if that's one of the metrics that you're using in your usability test. And quantitative results are anything that's got a numerical value, so it could be things like the time it took to complete a task or a scenario. It could be something like the number of participants who were able to complete a task and the number of participants who were not able to complete a task. What I usually put together is a combination report that includes things like a summary of quantitative results, screenshots from things like remote screen captures so that I can show what's happening in an interface when a usability tester is either struggling or encounters something that works really well for them. And I almost always will walk my clients through these reports by actually giving them a presentation. It's not often that I just hand something over to them without scheduling some kind of meeting to explain what happened. And that's because as the usability consultant, it's helpful to explain what's happening in a way that you can articulate what you're seeing and help the client understand this is what's causing problems for your users and this is a way that you can fix that. That's really where you can add a lot of value as a usability consultant, is to not only point out what's going wrong, but to help them understand how they can implement design changes that will remedy those situations. And one of the tools that you're learning in this class that I thought was extremely valuable was understanding things like design patterns and user interface design patterns, things like call to action buttons, navigation menus, because when you understand those concepts, you're able to articulate what's happening in an interface that either works well or doesn't work so well. So I've got a couple of slides here where I can show you examples of slides from the PowerPoint presentation that I put together for my clients explaining what happened during our usability test. Because of non-disclosure agreements, I had to take out the images that showed the screenshots of the testers using the application. So you'll see a few places in here where it says image omitted. I'll try and talk to what was happening in the test as best as possible. But what I wanted to share with you is there are some things that I knew as a library and information science student, in addition to usability testing, that really helped me articulate what was happening with these applications and help the client make a better decision because of some of the design patterns and actions that were used in these applications. And the first one that you would see on this image if we were looking at the actual presentation that was given to the client was on this interface there were about 4 different design patterns embedded into one particular point in this scenario. What was happening was the user was moving through an interface and trying to assign a new permission to a user's online account. And the way that the interface represented this action was by putting in a drop-down menu in a call to action button that was embedded in a table cell. And so they were trying to accomplish way too many things with all of these very different design patterns that really confused the user. So it not only made the page really difficult to look at, but it made it difficult for the usability testers to figure out what they were supposed to be doing at that point in time when they were trying to add this new permission to the user account. There were some other things that happened with the page where it was just really difficult to scan, and you could tell that the user was having problems at this point because she slowed down and was reading through all this information. She paused quite a bit. You could see her mouse cursor moving all around the page, and she just wasn't sure where she should go. Whereas if this was crafted from the user's point of view, there would have been a really clear call to action that would have guided the user down the path that she knew she should have taken to conduct this activity. And the next couple slides reference what I was talking about in terms of things that library and information science students would be well equipped to evaluate in these kinds of usability tests. I've seen a lot of occasions where an application or a website will use things like search tools or search catalogs in ways that are not really developed with the user in mind. And as a library and information science student, you have a good understanding of what they're trying to accomplish, but coming from a usability background and having this coursework behind you, you can really help developers and designers understand how they can facilitate these kinds of searches in a way that's more meaningful for the user. So in this particular example, this was the second application that we were evaluating, and there was a catalog of different kinds of permissions you could add to a user account, but there was no real prompt for the user when they got there. They had to come up with the search terms on their own. And because there weren't really any hints or suggestions given to the users, they all kind of stalled and got scared when they got to the search catalog and didn't really know how to progress forward. There was also some training and instructions on the interface screen that instructed the user to use the stemming search technique. And this felt pretty advanced for a lot of novice users, so we had people putting the asterisk at the beginning of the truncated search term they were trying to use. People would put in a full search term and then also include the asterisk, so it was just a little bit more complicated than it needed to be for this user base. And then finally, another example from the first application that we were evaluating that included search fields where there were so many different icons and buttons that were used to combine terms from searches that was very overwhelming to the usability testers. A lot of people had difficulty starting their searches because they felt so overwhelmed right away. So that when they got to this point in the application, they all just kind of stalled, and I think we only had about a 50% completion rate for this scenario because the interface for conducting something like a search was so complex. So those are just some examples of ways that you can package information and help recreate for people that did not observe the usability test what your testers encountered and why it was problematic. Like I mentioned, if you can ever include advice or suggestions for design patterns that might mitigate those issues, that really helps you stand out as a usability consultant because you're not only identifying the problems, you're helping people understand how they can overcome it and how they can design more efficiently to still accomplish those goals. So finally, here's some resources that I find helpful and that I consult pretty regularly. Usability.gov is a great place to go to help get templates that you can use for your own usability tests. It's also a great place that you can send clients who want to get up to speed on the principles of usability testing. And this is the website that has information about the benefits of usability testing. I've used that section of the website a couple of times in projects where we've had to help the client agree to spending the extra 3 or 4 weeks in a project to do usability testing because they can see that it's going to get them better results in a design later on down the road. If you're interested in careers in usability testing and design, the Usability Professionals Association is a great association to become a member of. They have a conference, I believe, in April or May each year with presenters from around the world, and they're a really great association to help you get an understanding of what the profession is like and also make connections with career practitioners. The third and fourth bullet are some books that you can look into that will help you get a better understanding of what it's like to participate as a user experience designer in a project environment, and also understand how to apply user-centered design skills in addressing design challenges and business problems. Jesse James Garrett, the author for that first book, is pretty prominent in the community, and that's a really helpful book for coming up to speed on a lot of the terminology, not only about usability and user-centered design principles, but also about the different roles that come into play in a project. And then the fourth book listed there, A Project Guide to UX Design. That's a great resource for getting a better understanding for what actually happens on a project when you're playing the role of an interaction designer or a usability tester. Boxes and Arrows is a great online community that has resources and articles posted. I put one up that is probably of interest to people that are looking into an information architecture career path or a user researcher career path. But coming from the program, one of the activities that I found that I really enjoyed most was a card sort. And this is a user-centered design technique where you can get a better understanding for how your users think about things like navigation menus and information architecture by doing things like writing out all of the contents of your website on index cards and laying them out and having users organize them in a construction that makes sense to them. It's a really fun practice. It helps get you insight into how users think about things like navigation and website organization, and it may be something fun for you to try out in your projects too. And finally, my contact information. If you have any questions about the career or about working in the field, I've got my email address there. I'm on LinkedIn, and if you want to connect through there and if you have a profile, feel free to reach out. And again, with my email, if you have any questions or just want to talk more about the profession, feel free to reach out. And Does anyone have any questions about any of the concepts that we talked about or anything about the applications and tools? Okay, Eric, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
It sounded like this might have been something you were doing, but I was watching one of Jeremy's videos, or Professor's videos. I don't want to get too informal here. And it was close to the beginning of the class, and what it was a student that had, I guess, graduated or had already done the class, and what he was doing was flipping a card for each step that he was taking. So he had essentially a number of cards, maybe 10 or 12, that were just about the same, and he would flip one and then it would show a button to press, and then he would flip another one and it would go to the next screen. And so it was essentially all the steps he would be taking, and it looked like it was towards the end of a design, and I just wondered if that might have been something you do too.
It sounds like that student's using some kind of iterative design approach, and I have not used a process where I flip cards necessarily, but I have done things like printed out a wireframe and sat down with a user and asked them questions like, if you were trying to find out information about this particular group, where would you go on the website? And it sounds like it's a similar goal to what that student was doing, trying to create an iterative approach to refining a design so that as the user progresses down their model, or excuse me, down their task, they have all of the design is supporting that kind of task progression. Any other questions?
I was just going to add real quick, it sounded like he already had it finished, but then it was sort of a way, you know, like already had the drawings, but then he was sort of putting it into practice in a way. But I'm not sure if that was the method, but that's kind of what I got out of it, that he had the drawings done, and it was like a way of navigating around in a sense.
Yeah, interesting. If it was a video or a website or something, I'd be interested in seeing it. But yeah, it sounds like a way that at least the designer was putting their information down on paper before moving it into development.
What do you do with people doing web design, people doing coding and all that who have no value for usability, who really just want to impose a vision or sort of a view of things that really is not the user's secondary concern? What do you do about that?
That is something that we still encounter pretty frequently, and in fact one of the projects that I'm working on right now kind of got the sense that they wanted to just skip through all of this research and just get down to development. And what we try to do in those situations is help educate clients and their partners about the value of user-centered design and the fact that even though you're investing a few extra weeks in the project, you're saving yourselves millions of wasted dollars in redeveloping the site later on down the road when you find out that it may not necessarily be working for users correctly, or coming up to a point where you've launched it and you're not getting the results that you're looking for because you had a completely different understanding of what you're trying to accomplish versus what your users are actually looking for. So it's in business, especially in our company, we've got a pretty firm commitment from leadership on the value of user-centered design. We do still encounter issues where people don't necessarily want to employ as much time as we'd like them to, but in those situations we try as best as we can to help them understand the value of what it means to invest a little bit of time up front for what actually happens later on down the road. And especially in redesign projects, if you can do things like take their existing website and gather some informal feedback, you can help the business start to understand why maybe their current solution is not working well. And from that point on, if you can get some feedback, you can start to have some discussions about whether it's an issue with the way the navigation is built, or you can try and move through it yourself and do something like a heuristic review and figure out if it's the way that the content on the website is set up, or you can talk to some users. Maybe there's a mismatch between the business's strategy and what the users are actually looking for. So really it's just a process of education and helping people to understand why it is a necessary step in website development. It's become pretty common in a lot of industries now, but there is still occasion where you'll get people that may not necessarily see the value right away, so it really helps if you can articulate why these kinds of things are important.
Okay, thank you very much, Sheena. So the students are starting their third seminar, so they're starting to do some user testing. They're starting to do some paper prototyping and user testing. They're going to be doing a presentation very similar to this one that you've just done, in terms of showing some testing process that they've gone through, talking about a script that they've used, talking about tasks that they've given the users, and then watch them fail at those tasks. What advice do you have to the students who are starting this process of an iterative design and getting users involved with that design, but they're not necessarily using even something as slick as Balsamiq or Azure or iRise? Do you have any advice for these folks just starting in their first round of iterations?
Even usability testing with a pencil and paper sketch is extremely valuable. Sometimes it might work to your benefit to start with those tools, because when people see a sketch or they see something in paper and pencil, they get the sense that it's not formal, and sometimes they feel more comfortable giving you feedback or constructive criticism about something that is very clearly still in an iterative design process. Sometimes if it's more formalized, people feel like it's too late for whatever reason to offer any kind of feedback that could be incorporated into the final development of the process. So probably first piece of advice is, just to know that there is value in doing that kind of testing, and that it doesn't necessarily have to be a slick and polished tool. Really talking to users and getting their input on the things that they're trying to do and the way that they think about using websites and looking for information is going to give you a lot of value, and that's very easily accomplished with the kinds of tests that students are going to undertake in this assignment. Another piece of advice that I would give is when you're sitting down with a user and talking to them about what's happening, it can be really easy when you see someone struggling to just kind of suggest, why don't you try clicking over here, or what do you think about this button? And it's really helpful if you can avoid that as much as possible, because you don't want to accidentally influence the user into doing something else, because it almost corrupts the integrity of your test if you're guiding the user on how to complete a task. So even if it does feel a little uncomfortable sometimes, it can be okay to sit in silence while the user thinks through what they're trying to accomplish. There were a couple times in the usability tests that I showed you examples from. We had testers that were just completely confounded by this application, and I so wanted to help them figure out how to use it, but I did everything I could to stay silent and let them work through the issue. And that got us a lot of really good feedback in the end that we could give to the clients about what users would actually experience if this application were deployed, and how they could go about remedying it, because the user was able to think on their own and tell me what they would be looking for instead of what they were actually seeing on the screen at that point in time.
What advice do you have for folks who would present a design to a user and then ask the user what they think. So do you think I'm doing it right? Do you think this is good? You know, as opposed to giving them a task and watching them fail at the task. What do you ask the general public, the users, what they think about an interface, and what do you think about that?
I generally don't ask them subjective things like, do you think this is good? Unless it's followed up with questions about tell me why. I try not to ask them questions about am I doing this right either. I think the information that you're trying to gather from those kinds of questions are things like, does this interface suit you, and would it help you achieve your objectives when you come to this website? And there's more ways that you can ask that without making it so much about you as the designer, and instead focusing on the feedback that you're looking from the user about their experience if they were to interact with that tool. So generally what I do in a project when I sit down with a user is I probably talk to them during an initial phase of user research where I've asked them things like, tell me about your job, tell me about your responsibilities, tell me what kinds of things you do in your day-to-day work. And when they tell me what they do in their day-to-day work, I make note of that so that when we get to usability testing, I can come back and say, you know, you've told me that as a human resources manager, you issue time cards to employees. Looking at this interface, where would you go to issue a time card? So instead of tying it, the questions that you're asking usability testing back to things like design critiques, we're tying it back to objectives that the user would undertake on the website. And one of the best ways that I got up to speed about conducting user interviews and focusing on asking more open-ended questions. First of all, the Library 210 reference course is a great course for learning more about asking open-ended questions. But I also looked at a lot of resources online. If you Google something like questions to ask during user interviews, you'll get a lot of good information about what kinds of open-ended questions you can ask to get to know your users, and what kinds of open-ended questions you can ask during something like a usability test or a design critique.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Sheena Goss, an interaction designer with Wells Fargo Bank and a previous student in SLIS and in this course. I'm not going to take credit for your rise here. I think you brought a lot of background to the program in visual design, and also you got a really good internship, and I think all those things definitely join together to get you some great opportunities. So thank you so much for coming and sharing your experience with the students in the course now, and I wish you the best wishes going forward.
Thank you very much. I'm so happy I got a chance to come back and talk to the students. I'm really passionate about helping students understand career paths and user experience, so please do reach out if you have any questions. And just a plug for the internship, if you are looking for opportunities, and I was in a situation where I needed to work on an internship outside of business hours, the program at the San Mateo County Library has many opportunities for distance learners. So if you have questions, feel free to email me and I can tell you a little bit more about my experience and how to get in touch with the librarians there.
Did you have a question, Eric?
I was just going to say that video that I was talking about earlier, I just posted. It wasn't one of yours, but somebody that did homework for 251. I'm not sure if you were teaching it at the time, though, but if Sheena, if you wanted to know what I was talking about, that was the video I spoke of.
Great, thank you. I'm going to copy that link and watch it after the presentation tonight.
Well, that was a wonderful presentation by Sheena Goss. I really appreciated her sort of hands-on, concrete recommendations for web usability, and she's really in the thick of it. She's really in a very narrow field. I think a lot of people in this LIST program, any MLIS program, are going to have a lot of opportunities outside of just, this very specific job of web usability, web analyst, usability analyst. So anyway, today I wanted to go over the rest of the class we're going to deal with tonight is getting started. Obviously, we had some technical issues. Speaker Sheena Goss, and I want to talk to you about grading and feedback as well. In the course, we are using Canvas. It's new to all of us, so I think that's causing some people some grief as we get sort of situated and accustomed to it. I'm going to go over the class schedule moving forward and talk specifically about the final pieces, the homework 3, the presentation, and the final project. And let me go ahead and move here. So first off, in the class, once you've completed an assignment or a discussion, you can, on the top right, you go into that old one, on the top right you'll see a rubric. So that rubric's important. That tells you why you got 4 out of 5 or 2 out of 5. And then I have a text feedback. You can see that right there in the middle. Number 2, read my feedback. And if you want to, you can add a response, and I'll get that immediately. If you want to respond, you can even add a video or an audio response if you want to. You can also do this for all of the assignments in one place. On the right-hand side, you can see there, if you click on Assignments in Canvas, you'll get this list, and then you can click for the text, for the rubric itself and the score. You can get more information there on the right-hand side. So there's actually, Canvas is very rich when it comes to the ability to get feedback on assignments and deliver feedback to assignments too. So any questions about getting feedback in Canvas? Okay, great. Thanks, Eric. So I'm going to move ahead one here. The rubrics that I have created, and the thing that delayed me, was to create these rubrics. You can see I've condensed the rubric that I had shown in the previous slides, in the beginning session that we had. I condensed it into a 5-point scale. So is your discussion for the week or for the 2 weeks, does it apply course concepts? Your messages, do they give feedback to classmates? And I've really been sort of emphasizing the personalizing your feedback, so giving a name to the student that you're talking to. Do you bring in your own personal experiences? Do you bring in examples that go beyond just the readings themselves? And do you do the 2 minimum per week, that number of posts? So if you do those 5 things, you get a full score in the discussion area. Do you have any questions about the discussion area and the mechanics of the discussion? In the assignment rubric, it's another one. These are between 5 and 10 points. I broke the first assignment up into 2 smaller assignments. So assignment 3 coming up is a 10-point assignment. But does it address the key concept in the seminar? And I think some people have some problems here if they don't sort of define their terms and describe the readings that they've done. So if you launch into some sort of description of what you've done or description of a problem without defining where you got it, the information from, which part of the readings you're talking about, all those things, you need to put those right in there. Be very concrete in the assignment. It shows that you've done the reading. It allows you to communicate that later, maybe with somebody else. So practicing communicating the lessons that you're getting in the class, that's key. And if you don't do that, then I don't have any proof. I don't have any really clear understanding of what you've gained through the readings and the materials. You've included all the required pieces, and I've tried to be very, very concrete and clear about what is required for each one of these. A number two pieces of turned in, comments to 3 classmates. Been very, very specific about those. And people are doing a really good job of cropping their screenshots annotating with images or circling things, being really rich in the way that they illustrate their submissions. And they're also replying to their peers with substance. It's not just a sentence or two that says "good job." You know, it's a substantial description of what your peer's done. And yeah, go ahead, Caroline. Just let me turn off my mic.
Yes, my quick question just about cropping the images. Sometimes I've wanted to use images with the wording is a little small, so I feel like sometimes if I crop the image, you're not able to see all the wording that I want to show. In that case, is not cropping the image all right?
That's fine. The problem with cropping comes when maybe you've loaded a couple of web pages, or you've got 3 or 4 levels of controls on the browser, and you can see all those. You know, not cropping the image always, if there's a problem with not cropping in the image, it always comes in not being able to read the text well enough. So if you're doing something that makes the text more readable, whatever it is, all the better. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, what's worked best for me is if I try to crop an image and let's say I go ahead and start it at 400 pixels width, then that doesn't work so well. It tends not to be very readable. But if I crop it and then save it at a very large size, let's say twice that, and then I resize it to 400, that's always worked best for me for some reason, and then it's I'm not sure why that is, but I just had a better experience that way.
And Caroline, what tool are you using to do the cropping and the illustrations?
I've been using Imager.com, and it does allow you sometimes to upload the image as a thumbnail, and I find that that crops the image. If I don't do that, then it comes out too big.
Okay. I guess when I say crop the image, get rid of all the extraneous stuff that doesn't have to do with the point you're trying to make. And I do realize that D2L was a lot easier dealing with images and discussions. So I don't know what to do about Canvas in that sense. Yeah, you have to upload it outside of Canvas and then make a link to it, and it's awkward. So there's definitely a minus for Canvas and discussions. Go ahead, Eric.
At the beginning, I used to be able to upload a big picture and then resize it, but lately I haven't been able to do that, and I just want to know if we still can and I'm not doing something right, or if that feature's not available anymore. Or...
You know, they update the software every 2 weeks on the fly, so they may have taken away that ability. That's the first I've heard of that. Okay, then the schedule moving forward. Now we've done Seminar 2, Design Seminar 2, and IOU grades on your homework 2, the sketches. So far this term I have not really kept up with homework and grading as well as I have, so I'm going to try and get that done in the next day or two. Then you're watching lectures 7 and 8 and talking about those, and you're doing a paper prototype for homework 3. That is due on July the 25th. Then from that paper prototype, you're going to be doing presentations in the week of July 25th through August 1st. That's your paper prototyping with users, homework 3. Then the final project due August 10th at noon. Let's go over those in a little bit more detail. So far in the course, you've done the seminars 1 and 2 from June through July 11th. And you've seen lectures, the first 2 beginning lectures, and then 2 and 3, 4, 5, and 6. You've done quizzes 1 and 2, and you've done homeworks 1, and now you've just finished homeworks 2. Tonight we had a guest speaker, wonderful Sheena Goss from Wells Fargo tonight. Coming up, starting tonight, Lecture 7 on User Experience is live. Lecture 8, there's 2 parts to Lecture 8 on prototyping. Then Homework 3, paper prototypes, and the presentations July 25th through the 1st. About the presentation times. Okay, Eric, let me turn off my mic.
Well, I remember that I had asked you before, but I just wondered, since we were talking now about it, that they had already been decided, but I see now that they haven't, so that's all I meant to say about that.
I think I have an error here. Paper prototypes are due on July the 25th. Sorry about that. So that is wrong. Okay. All right. So when it comes to scheduling the presentations, so I'm going to be opening up a survey here. I'll publish the survey today or tomorrow. Actually, I'll publish the survey tomorrow, and this will give you. I'll give you 10 or 15 of these times, and you'll choose the ones that work for you. I mean, you'll choose the ones that actually you'll tell me the ones that don't work. I'm really looking for people to be as flexible as possible. So if you have a specific conflict in a time like Friday 10 to 11 a.m. If you can't do that, then mark it down as undoable. Some people in the past have done this, and it causes a lot of problems. If you say, I only want to present on that Thursday at 2 p.m. and that's the only time I'm available, it causes a lot of problems. So try to avoid that. Try to just mark the times, the conflict times that you really can't make it, and then that'll make it more flexible for everybody. So anyway, you'll have a doodle. I'll have a doodle survey up with 10 or 15 times. Mark the times you can't do, and then I'll give you a set of forum posts, and you can go in and just select the post, select the date that works for you. So don't. I know this causes a lot of anxiety up front, but it really has not caused anybody any problems, because the two-step process here makes it possible for us to give you, everybody gets a time that works for them. So I'll have the initial survey up, the doodle survey up tomorrow, and you can go in and mark the times that just won't work for you. And then as soon as I get everyone's entries, I'll give you the full set of 4 or 5 times that everybody can sign up for. So, and I guarantee you there will not be a conflict here. There will not be no presentation times that work for you. It doesn't work that way. So, Eric, you got the way that this works, right?
I do. I didn't realize that you were about to answer the question that I was just asking. I feel really bad now.
No, it's a good question, and everybody has it. So obviously there's no reason to feel bad here. So homework 3 is up and ready for you to complete. That is working with 2 testers. So you're going to find 2 testers and conduct 2 testing sessions with a paper prototype that changes. So you're going to be making changes to this prototype. You're going to add 1 forum post with your presentation files, and then attend your live Illuminate session. And you're going to deliver a 10-minute presentation. So this is 2 parts. You're going to upload a PowerPoint presentation, and then the following week you're going to enter Illuminate, or I'll call it Collaborate here, and then you're going to give a presentation based on your PowerPoint presentation. So this is a matter of finding people to do it and finding a specific problem from this last round that you did, the sketches that you did in homework 2. So we're building on homework 2, and we're putting your solutions in front of users and making changes. The iterative features in your design work are really important. So you're going to make a change, you're going to do something, show it to people, they're going to give you some feedback that you don't expect, and then you're going to make changes to your sketches and give them back to people. Don't necessarily want them to be the same people, so you should have at least 2 testers. The first round you show it to someone, the second round you show it to someone else. So I give you a wealth of no. In fact, yeah, other classmates are a bad idea. Probably, you want to go out and find folks who are not involved in the course. And you really want to see people that are directly in front of you. So, you know, it's okay to use a dad or a brother or a wife or a husband. Get those people and show them your prototype. Don't ask them what they think, but give them a set of tasks and have them work through those tasks. So you're going to create, here I am in step 2, reviewing the detailed description of the method. There's a web page there. You're going to create the paper prototype, give the user a set of tasks. I'm not so concerned, you know, it talks about conducting a post-session interview. I'm not so concerned about the interview and what the people thought of the interface. That's less important. As our guest speaker pointed out, it's really about completing tasks and getting something done with the interface. You are the expert. The people you're testing, they're not the experts. So don't give them an artifact and ask their opinion. Ask them to be subjective about your interface. You know the patterns. They don't. So you are the expert. Walk into that situation, be the expert. Give the user interface to a user and watch them fail and make iterations and design changes based upon those. All right, so conduct at least 2 sessions with separate users and change your design at least once. Now you're going to create a presentation of no more than 10 minutes. Scan or take photos of 2 versions of the prototype. Be sure to describe your users, so their demographics, how you found them, the tasks you asked them to complete, and specific design changes that you made based upon specific user feedback, and be concrete. That's really the key and core of this presentation and this homework 3. Problems that you found in your interface and ways that you solve those problems. And present your work here in Illuminate and ask questions of your peers. So we're going to be in groups of 4 or 5, maybe 3 or 4, depending. And so each of you will be asking questions of the other presenters. You only need to attend a single session, your own session. So Eric, go ahead. Let me turn off my mic.
So it sounds like we're going to be talking about the 2 sessions in our presentation, or am I not seeing that correctly here?
That's exactly right. You're going to be talking about your testing sessions. You're not going to be doing the testing here in Illuminate. No, you're going to be out there preparing your slide presentation, your presentation about this interface with live people, hopefully face-to-face. I think that's really the best way to do it. You can use PowerPoint if you want to, the Balsamiq, some of these other tools. As Sheena pointed out, paper and pencil often work really, really well. So, Eric, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. That's going to be interesting to talk about, you know, the process and going through and the testing, and as well as what we come up with. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm not so much interested in a beautiful final product. You know, your interface is beautiful and it looks great and all that. More important is your description of the process. I did this, you know, maybe it looks a little sloppy to start. I found these problems. This is the next version. The users seem to react to it well this way, and I seem to have solved the problem that I found in my sketches from homework 2. So it's not about a beautiful final product. It's about a description of your process, how you work through those problems, doing those designs, and using iterative design to create a better interface. Is that good?
It is. Thank you.
Caroline, did you have any questions about homework 3 before we move on? And I'm really glad to have you guys engaged. There's only a couple of you here, but you're really asking questions that all the rest of the class is thinking about as they watch this later on. So Caroline, do you have any questions? You could raise your hand if you do. I won't put you on the spot. But so for final project 20 point, I call it a capstone. Basically, it's the entire class in miniature. So you're doing the evaluation piece, the design piece, the implementation piece all together on a problem you haven't worked with before. So, I mean, you can stick with LOTS or SJSU website if you want to. Very few people do that. They're sick of it by then. You can go out and find another interface, anything that involves a computer and a person working together. This could be, I've seen people go to Safeway and do grocery kiosk. People have done text-only interfaces for their ILS. So it's up to you. Then you'll put that whole thing packaged together in about 5 pages of text, 10 pages with images total. And then you're going to submit that. That actually doesn't require any discussion, so you're not going to be talking about your classmates' work. I really designed this to be something that could plug very easily into your e-portfolio piece as you finish the program. This is a 5 to 10 page report submitted to a Dropbox. Any questions overall? Okay, great. And I encourage anybody who's listening to this, or Carolyn or Eric, who feel lost, want to talk with me about the class on my cell. We can do email. I really want to be totally available for you moving forward. We only have a little bit more in the class. We have one more round of discussion, one more round of homework, the presentation, and the final project, and then we're wrapping it up. So the classes, I think it's been a little rough with this new learning management system, but I think once I get the hang of this and once I can get you rapid feedback, I think we're going to pick it right up. So thank you very much, and I'm going to go ahead and finish the recording and talk to you again for your presentations.